reaching a deal. The Trump administration and Congress are set to approve a coronavirus aid package of up to $450 billion. We'll tell you where the money would go. Helping hands, how the Vatican is taking part in the global fight against COVID-19. Christ is risen. We'll show you Orthodox faithful in Russia and the Holy Land celebrating Easter. And that's the spirit. Pope Francis says following the 10 Commandments is not enough to be a good Christian. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, April 20th, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. The White House is working with lawmakers on a new $450 billion aid package to help small businesses stay afloat. There are also growing demands to ramp up testing for the coronavirus before more Americans start leaving the safety of home. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, as you know, that first aid package to small businesses simply ran out of money. In the meantime, Vice President Mike Pence is assuring governors that the federal government is working around the clock to ramp up coronavirus testing, and he had words of encouragement.
Vice President Mike Pence visiting FEMA, giving words of encouragement.
I want you to know that your labors here are not in vain. You are making a difference in the life of this nation. We are living in an unprecedented time.
And talking progress.
We just completed a very productive meeting of members of the White House Coronavirus Task Force with governors all across the country, and we heard again not only the fact that we are making progress in slowing the spread.
The plea from states, help for more coronavirus testing. The need, more swabs and chemical reagents. Sunday, President Donald Trump held up a swab.
We're preparing to use the Defense Production Act to increase swab production in one U.S. facility by over 20 million additional swabs per month.
Of course, the huge worry.
And if we let it back in the door, it will reassert itself. We've seen it around the world before. Let down your guard and this disease comes back with a vengeance. We can't let that happen.
With all due respect, I think there's anybody who thinks we're doing this just to take away people's liberties and rights isn't looking at the data that we're looking at. We're doing what we're doing to try to save lives.
Meanwhile, across the nation, calls to reopen.
Freedom and liberty. We're losing it.
And calls for patience.
I'm just grateful that Governor DeWine has kept us safe in the actions he's taken so far.
Meanwhile, the White House pushes for billions of more dollars for small businesses to stay afloat.
I think that the objective of these policies is to build a bridge to the other shore.
And President Trump recently told faith leaders he's eager to see churches and places of worship reopen. Boeing is putting 27,000 workers back to work, and Bobcat, which makes farming equipment in North Dakota, is also resuming production. Tracy?
Okay, thank you, Owen. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Starting in the Senate, Congress is working to pass the latest aid bill. The bill's top aim to boost a small business loan program that's run out of money. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
Tracy, lawmakers admit some major companies got millions in loopholes in the Small Business Paycheck Protection Program. Shake Shack was one such chain. They're now returning $10 million back into the program. Small businesses hope this second time around they will get enough money to survive.
Colleagues, it's past time to get this done for the country.
The newest relief package includes $300 billion more in critical aid for small businesses, $75 billion for hospitals and medical facilities, and $25 billion for states to invest in coronavirus testing.
We will not be able to get the economy going full-fledged unless we have testing.
Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says it's all part of Democrats' three-pronged approach. Money to bolster manufacturing and supply chains, contact tracing for those who've been infected with COVID-19, and $300 billion focused on testing. And he says President Trump should listen.
I think there is huge pressure to do it. I have urged him to use the Defense Production Act to get this money out. the way we've talked, the $30 billion. But at least there ought to be one person appointed in charge and making sure there's a national focus and effort on testing.
Republican Senator Marco Rubio has pushed hard for additional small business aid, and he supports more money for rapid testing.
What I think that really means is it puts real pressure on leaders, starting at the federal level but down to the state level, to use the time we have now wisely, to develop the things that we need to be able to open up again as safely as possible. Number one is the rapid testing. That is the most important thing we can do.
224 faith-based organizations and over 1,000 faith leaders sent a letter today to President Trump and U.S. lawmakers to include immigrants in the newest aid bill.
I believe what Pope Francis says, that we need to build bridges and not walls. And that's why I believe that we need to care for undocumented immigrants in the U.S.
The Senate is holding a special session tomorrow afternoon aimed at getting this bill passed to help Americans across the country. Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
News of the latest economic package comes as tens of millions of Americans apply for unemployment benefits. For the week ending April 11th, the Labor Department reported more than 5 million Americans applied for unemployment benefits. That brings the total number of Americans who have filed for unemployment to roughly 22 million. Joining me now by Skype to talk more about the economic impact of the coronavirus here in the U.S. is Joel Griffith, research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Joel, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Well, as we've reported before, the Paycheck Protection Program ran out of money last week. How important is it for members of Congress to reach a deal on this latest relief package?
Look, for a lot of businesses, this is highly important. As you've mentioned before, we have had almost 20 million people file for unemployment. You have the typical business only has enough capital. If it's a small business, only has enough cash on hand to last about 3.5 weeks. We're now 30-something days into the shutdown. So businesses do need access to this, but this has to be revised. The first time around, it's no mistake that we had these so-called loopholes in that legislation. There were a lot of special interest groups that were lobbying for large businesses such as Shake Shack that have thousands of employees to be able to apply for these loan forgiveness programs. This has to be addressed in this new package. We need to get aid directed towards those smaller businesses and the ones that need it most.
Joe, obviously, this is super important that we get this done. What's the holdup in getting it done?
Well, we see some individuals such as Speaker Pelosi that are holding this legislation hostage. They're saying that they want more aid to the states. And important to keep in mind is they're not talking about just aid to state and local governments to help with the healthcare crisis. You have a lot of very badly mismanaged state and local governments in certain parts of the country that are trying to use this crisis as a way to actually bail out their already very poor budget situations. They want all of us to go ahead and bail them out for their past mistakes. We need to go ahead and focus on this. Let's just be a standalone package, focus on getting aid directly to small businesses without any of these other special interests or big government needs attached.
This package, Joel, reportedly contains about $25 billion for coronavirus testing. How significant will that be in helping to reopen the country? And how do we know how it will be structured?
Well, testing in general is very important. We need to have tests. Of course, also, we need to have rapid results of those tests so that we can go ahead and trace contacts, people that have come into contact with those with the virus. This is important because we need to give governors and mayors the confidence to open up their cities and their states, because until we get the economy rolling again, we're going to see a lot of despair out there. And also, if we don't have the testing, if we don't have the test reports, that's going to mean less confidence on the part of people to actually go back to work and go back to business, even when they're given permission to do so. So that's important both from a confidence level for the legislators, the governors, and also for people just to get back out there and get back to their normal lives that we've had to put on pause.
Well, Joe, I want to talk about unemployment benefits quickly. Millions of people are still waiting for those benefits. Can you touch on that for us?
Yeah, this has been, of course, an unprecedented amount of filings. We saw over close to 20 million people file for unemployment benefits in just a few weeks. We've never seen anything this massive in the history of the country, and that's because we've never actually had entire states or cities shutting down. So it's important we get aid into the hands of those that need them. One of the things we'd like to see addressed by this is the legislation that was passed about a month ago increase the federal unemployment benefits to a level where actually a lot of people will end up earning more on unemployment than they were on the job. And while this might be a temporary benefit to individuals, this will actually delay the economic recovery longer term, because some people will be incentivized to actually stay home rather than go back to work once they have that green light. So we need to go ahead and make sure that we keep benefits going to those that need them. Of course, we want to make sure people are taken care of, but also ensure that those benefits that you receive on unemployment don't exceed what you're actually earning on the job, because we don't want to unintentionally incentivize people to stay home once they're able to go safely back to work.
Well, Joel, thank you so much for your insight. As always, we appreciate it. Joel Griffith, Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks again, Joel.
Thank you.
A gunman dressed in a police uniform goes on a shooting rampage in Canada's worst mass shooting in history. And one witness says it could have been much worse.
That big stop is always full of seniors in the morning for breakfast. Like, that place is full every day. So being a Sunday, that he could have done a lot of damage. So I'm glad that the restaurant was closed.
The shooting in Canada's eastern province of Nova Scotia left 18 people dead, including the gunman. The rampage started late Saturday and lasted until Sunday morning. Police say they found victims at several locations. In addition to wearing a police uniform, investigators say the 51-year-old alleged shooter also made his car look like a Royal Canadian Mounted Police cruiser. A protest in Israel drew 2,000 people, all adhering to strict social distancing guidelines. They wore masks and stood 6 feet apart in Tel Aviv last night. The protesters rallied against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his plan to form an emergency government with his main rival. They accused Netanyahu of using the coronavirus pandemic to avoid prosecution on charges of corruption and bribery. Refugees in northern Syria do not have any protection against the coronavirus pandemic. A camp of 500,000 refugees has no masks or protective equipment. Doctors say they are still waiting for ventilators that were promised by the World Health Organization. So far, they have not recorded any cases of COVID-19. In Croatia, engineers blow up a spire of the historic Zagreb Cathedral, but it was on purpose. The top of the northern spire was damaged in an earthquake last month and has to be replaced. Some en masse watched the controlled demolition on Friday. The Catholic cathedral, which is dedicated to the Assumption of Mary and the Hungarian kings St. Stephen and St. Ladislaw, is the tallest building in Croatia. Another postponement because of the coronavirus pandemic. Pope Francis is moving next year's World Meeting of Families, and he's also rescheduling World Youth Day. A statement from today from the Vatican says the World Meeting of Families will be in June of 2022 in Rome, and World Youth Day will take place in Lisbon in August of 2023. Caritas Internationalis plays a key role in the Vatican's task force to care for people around the world affected by COVID-19. Caritas has a network of aid agencies spread out in local dioceses in over 150 nations. They belong to the first working group of the Vatican's commission dedicated to listening and supporting local churches. Aloysius John, Secretary General of Caritas Internationalis, joins us now from Rome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, too.
Well, Caritas sent out a survey to bishops' conferences asking for information about their needs. What type of response did you receive, and what are the bishops most worried about?
Till now, we have sent letters to the questionnaire to the Bishops' Conference, and we obtained about 140. Still others are coming. The most important needs today are how to upgrade the equipments in the hospitals, because 85 countries out of 140, they have hospitals at the national level. How to upgrade the hospitals, like materials like facilitators for respiration and other instruments. They are much worried about the PPE, that's personal protection equipments, so gloves, and then the dresses for the nurse, for the people who are taking care of the sick people, and also the mask. They're also worried about a certain number of basic medicines, where they say there is going to be a huge number. They said we must be able to get the medicines, which may be sometimes a bit difficult to procure in some of the countries.
Is there a region that you're focusing your efforts on the most, and if so, why?
Yeah, we are focusing now at the moment on Africa and Middle East, and also in some parts of Latin America. Africa is the most preoccupying continent because the poverty is very high and there is too much of congestion. People are living very close in the urban areas. So our main preoccupation is how to get into action quickly in Africa. There is already an outbreak. South Africa is very much affected, but we want to stop the pandemic, at least prevent the pandemic from gaining grounds quickly. So we are more involved in helping them. Africa is one area of preoccupation. And then Middle East, because Middle East is very specific in the sense that there is violence going on, there is war, there are lots of refugee camps, and migrants are everywhere. So our main preoccupation is how to attain them and how to help the people in a situation where there is war. And this is the case in Venezuela today, where people are leaving the country massively, and also Ecuador. So these are the specific areas where we are very much worried about. And of course, there is Bangladesh, where there are Rohingyas, and we are also very much worried as to how we could really help this population there. So these are the key, I would say, focus areas for us.
As we start to get closer to the recovery phase of this virus, what type of prevention activities are you organizing?
There are lots of activities which are taking place now. First of all, we have put in place a COVID-19 response fund. This fund is meant to help the member organizations put up preventive activities. What are the preventive activities? Number one, giving the right to information, the right to right information for the people who are lost. Another area where we are trying to prevent is to give people the basic necessities, because one of the needs that people have is basic hygiene necessities. We are giving them, and they have been trained also how to use the products to wash their hands, and also to disinfect their hands. Another area is food security. One of the key problems, especially in Africa, and also to a certain extent in Middle East, is people don't have food to eat. So there we are trying to help the people to have food so that they are maintained in their living in their houses, and they respect the confinement. We are also taking other activities of sensitization by giving them lots of information on how to take care of the elders, how to take care of the children, and also how to prevent the children from getting into contact with the people who are contagious.
Well, thank you so much for all that you're doing. Thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it. Aloysius John, Secretary General of Caritas Internationalis.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, analysis on the impact of social distancing in the United States. Abortion clinics in Tennessee are still open despite a ban on non-essential medical procedures. The governor ordered a ban earlier this month so supplies of protective equipment could be saved for hospitals dealing with the coronavirus. A federal judge ruled on Friday that abortions would not use a lot of equipment. In Kansas, a federal judge says that there is a good chance the state's 10-person limit for attending church services does violate religious freedom. The ruling comes after two churches filed a lawsuit against the order issued by Democratic Governor Laura Kelly. Another hearing has been set for later this week. How to reopen the country and protect the nation's public health? That is the question before lawmakers and public health officials as they weigh when and how to ease social distancing guidelines in the U.S. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about this is Dr. Mark Strand, professor in the North Dakota State University School of Pharmacy and Department of Public Health. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So what do we know so far about the impact social distancing has had on curbing the spread of COVID-19 here in the U.S.?
It's been absolutely essential in being able to suppress the outbreak. You know, when we think about New York City, for example, which was hit so hard, the state put in shelter-in-place orders on March 20th, and within 15 days, they were able to see the curve peak out and start to decline. And so there's no question that this isn't the result of having implemented social distancing practices and seeing the American people rise up and respond and respect that.
Well, federal and state lawmakers are looking at ways to possibly lift the stay-at-home orders and also to reopen the country. How difficult is it to predict when to do so? And do you think that we can do it and not lose the ground that we've already gained?
It's extremely important that we do this on a regional basis. I think the White House has provided some good guidance with the Opening Up America document, which talks about phase one requiring 14 days of having sustained a decline in new cases and a decline in the number and the proportion of cases that test positive. And so that 14-day window is particularly important. And I think that can allow regions, and we've seen states come together in coalitions to work together to protect regions because there is that variability. So I think that should give us confidence that we can start to open up, but we need to do that in a way that's alongside the evidence, not by, just rash decisions.
Mark, let's talk about testing. How important is it, and what type of testing is needed?
Testing is absolutely critical. Currently, we're just testing for RNA, and meaning testing that a person has disease presently, but we need antibody testing to determine who has been sick or who is sick but hasn't yet developed symptoms. And so testing allows us to, one, determine the extent of the outbreak in a given community or how many people really have the disease. But beyond that, it's also really critical to be able to confirm that, say, healthcare workers, teachers, or other individuals who have a lot of essential roles and in contact with lots of people, that they're not sick and therefore can confidently go back to work. And those whom they're serving can be comfortable that they're not going to contract COVID from somebody who's, attending to them. So the testing is extremely important. And we're seeing states who are doing high rates of testing. They're also seeing lower rates of test positive. So that's demonstrating the ability to get a handle on the extent of the problem and thereby snuff out small clusters that do appear in different cases.
Mark, quickly, we don't have much time left, but I want to ask you about contact tracing. There's a lot of questions swirling around that. Can you explain what it is?
Yeah, it's when a public health professional finds all the individuals that a sick person has been in contact with in the previous 14 days and then just determines that they aren't themselves sick and therefore able to quarantine them in order to suppress that outbreak. So it's just basically tracking down individuals that a sick person has been in contact with. Again, really important. We need lots of resources to help with that over the next few weeks and months.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us, for your analysis and helping us to sort this all out. Dr. Mark Strand, thanks again.
My pleasure.
Up next, a look at how Orthodox Christians celebrated Easter this past weekend. And Pope Francis delivers a message of hope on Divine Mercy Sunday. Orthodox Christians around the world celebrated Easter this past weekend. In Russia, services were held despite calls for self-isolation and a ban on public events. Russian Orthodox priests celebrated Easter at Holy Trinity Cathedral in the city of Yekaterinburg. Many of the faithful wore face masks. One local resident says that she believes this joyous Easter mood defeated the fears over the coronavirus outbreak. Orthodox Christian priests at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem celebrated yesterday as well. Last year, there were huge crowds on hand, with more lining the narrow alleys outside. But this year, only a few clergy. Pope Francis suggests the faithful should accept the mercy of the Lord, just as the Apostle Thomas did.
Siamo tutti fragili, tutti uguali, tutti preziosi.
At his Mass for Divine Mercy Sunday yesterday at the Church of Santo Spirito next to the Vatican, the Holy Father says God will always pick us up when we fall because he wants us to look at him and not our mistakes and sins. At the end of the Mass, Pope Francis sent his blessing to the Eastern Catholic Rite and Orthodox churches. Pope Francis says following the Ten Commandments is not enough to be considered a good Christian.
Nascere di nuovo e lasciare che lo Spirito entri in noi.
This morning, the Holy Father urged the faithful to leave room for the Holy Spirit. He says we should always follow where the Spirit is guiding us. Pope Francis says this is what it means to be born again. And the key to opening one's life to the Holy Spirit is prayer. And a reminder, EWTN broadcasts Mass throughout the day. Mass airs at 8 a.m., noon, and 7 p.m. Eastern. We're also showing the Pope's daily Mass and other special programming throughout the day. We also have Eucharistic adoration from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. on our website, EWTN.com. And finally tonight, today is the birthday of EWTN foundress Mother Angelica. Mother was born Rita Rizzo in Canton, Ohio on this date back in 1923. She took her final solemn vows in 1953. And in 1981, she founded EWTN. Today, the network has 11 TV channels in multiple languages, reaching more than 310 million homes. Mother passed away on Easter Sunday, 2016. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.